My name is Andre Azzolini, and I work at Broadleaf Commerce. Today we'll be talking about Thymeleaf, which is a modern Java templating language, kind of a successor to JSP. Works a little bit differently, but a lot of projects nowadays are trying to move to things like Mustache or Thymeleaf or one of the newer alternatives. And this is one that we like quite a bit at Broadleaf, and it's one that we're using for both our admin app and for our provided demo sites, and it's what we encourage people to build applications with as well. And so today we'll be starting with some basics of Thymeleaf and moving on to some more intermediate and advanced use cases that we found, kind of showcasing some of the features of the language. So to start off, a brief introduction. I graduated from UT at Austin with a degree in computer science. After that, I worked at Credera, which is a consulting company in Dallas. I think Brent Lemons spoke here not too long ago. He's also from Credera. And Credera was actually kind of the incubator of Broadleaf Commerce. We're a smaller company, kind of a startup, growing quickly. And I'm a senior engineer at Broadleaf Commerce now. So Broadleaf Commerce, what is it? It's an open source Java enterprise e-commerce framework. So we build tools that help people make websites to sell things online. We do a lot of advanced things like pricing, very complex pricing scenarios, offer engine for calculating promotions, those kinds of things. We have a CMS as well, which if we have time at the end, I will demo a little bit since it involves some Thymeleaf customizations that we've done. That will be nice to see. Our focus is on extensibility and scalability. So, we try to handle high volume sites that process, tens of thousands of orders per day. And we're based on a very core stack of Spring and Hibernate and Thymeleaf as well. So the agenda for today, we'll, talk about why should you use Thymeleaf? Why is it better than JSP? What does it provide that JSP doesn't provide? We'll talk about some basics. We'll look at some syntax for achieving things like looping and replacing variables in HTML pages and those kinds of things. We'll also talk about some more advanced things like Thymeleaf processors, for example, which are similar to JSP tag libs. We'll cover a few of the third-party plugins that people have written for Thymeleaf and just kind of let y'all know what's out there in case the application that you're building would be well served from these plugins. And then we'll talk about a couple of different examples excuse me, of how we use Thymeleaf at Broadleaf. So why use Thymeleaf? These are three of the main reasons that people find that they like about Thymeleaf. So first of all, it's not a compiled language like JSP. And what this gives you is a very short feedback loop. You can just save your template, go over to your browser, refresh the page, and you can get your changes immediately. You don't have to attempt to recompile it, have to restart your server. So it makes developing it very quick. It's a natural templating language, so there's not things that sit outside of normal HTML, DOM elements like JSP, where you might have, your looping constructs would be like, C colon whatever. It's more of a natural templating language where you take the existing DOM tags that you have and add attributes to them that will be processed by Thymeleaf. And what this gets you is the ability to actually preview the Thymeleaf templates in a normal web browser without having to run it on a server and have any of this processing. So what's nice about that is as designers work, they can code their templates and they see exactly what it is. Then they can give it to a developer who adds the Thymeleaf markup, but he doesn't have to change the template that the designer worked on. So when it goes back to the designer for further tweaks, they want to customize it, add something, move some elements around, all the designer has to do is move those elements, and then they don't really have to go through that second process of translating it back into JSPs afterwards. And there's plugins, specifically Thymall, which I think I mentioned in the ecosystem section, but that is a JavaScript library that can work with Thymeleaf to let you do kind of the includes of different fragments, and it'll process those things with JavaScript so that designers can break up their files how they want to break them up. So say you have like a listing of products on a page, and each product block would be a fragment. You could separate that to a separate file and include it. And then of course when you're processing it on the server side, you would have actual products that would loop through and display in blocks, whereas the designers would just see the blocks that are hard-coded. And it's written with a very modular architecture. Just about every component of Thymeleaf is pluggable and very easy to hook into and customize. So one example of that is how to resolve templates. So Thymeleaf provides things that let you resolve it out of your servlet. You can resolve it directly from a file system if you have your templates on the file system. But you could provide your own implementation as well. And that's one of the things that we've done, is we've provided a way to serve templates from the database, which then lets us edit template or provide an interface for editing templates in the admin and then surfacing them directly on the site, with users, not having to redeploy an application, recompile anything. It's just served straight from the database. Okay, so let's get into some basics. Obviously, using Thymeleaf is about as basic as it gets, which is pretty simple. You have a view resolver and a template resolver, which are parallels to how normal JSPs work anyways. You'll have your JSP view resolver and template resolver. So this is just how you can use Thymeleaf as your template engine. They provide the Spring template engine. You don't have to use Spring with Thymeleaf. You can do it in a standalone application, but many web applications nowadays are Spring, and that's pretty much all you need to get up and running with Thymeleaf. Alright, so most basic thing we can talk about here is getting some value from some Java code onto a template. And the way that we do that is with this THText attribute that I've added to this span tag that you can see here. And so what you see inside the span is a default header, and then there's also this THText attribute. And so this is where that natural templating part that I mentioned comes into play. If you were just to take this index.html file and open it up in your web browser, your browser doesn't understand what THText is. It doesn't mean anything to it. So it'll just render a normal span tag, and inside of that will be the text, a default header. And so as your designers are building this template, they just build their normal tags like that, and they'll see a default header. And then a developer comes in and he adds that THText attribute, which is outputting something. And when it actually gets processed by the server side, it'll replace a default header, which is the text inside of the span tag, with the value of this header variable. So the dollar with the curly braces is just very standard Spring's expression language, which is going to grab a variable from the model and output that instead. And so when Thymeleaf renders, we'll see that there's a span there that now, instead of having a default header, it'll have my header message. But even though with this Thymeleaf markup is in place, the designer will still see just a default header, so that he can continue working on his design while the developers are adding in the actual logic for the templating engine. And so the top is just a very simple controller method that just responds to the root URL and adds that string my header message to the model keyed by the word header, which we then use to grab from the span THText. So Thymeleaf has a lot of focus on internationalization. It's actually the two core developers are based in Spain, which is nice because they are obviously catering to the Java market, which has a very large population in the US, but they are also concerned with their own internationalization features, and so it's kind of at the forefront of what Thymeleaf provides. And so what we're seeing here now in this index.html is that we're using this pound sign instead of the dollar sign. And that's a different Thymeleaf syntax for grabbing a property from a property file. So here we might have two different messages.properties files, one for English and one for Spanish, and they define two different ways or two different phrases for the header. And then, based on the locale that you have resolved, you can plug into the locale. Otherwise, it'll use just your Java default locale. You'll have the rendering in two different ways. So this is, obviously hard coded to this homepage.header string, which we're then expecting in messages.properties. But there's nothing stopping you from getting a little fancier and making the string that you want to render dynamic as well. So here what we're doing instead is putting homepage.header as a model attribute, and then we'll use the dollar for the header, and we'll resolve the string homepage.header out of that. And then since that's inside the hash sign expression, it'll go look up homepage.header from your messages files. Alright, I'm going to stop for questions, and feel free to interrupt me at any time with any questions y'all have. Alright, move on. So sometimes you want to output raw values. Maybe you have something a little bit special. For example, maybe you have in your admin application, you're providing a rich text field where people can go and they've got this little WYSIWYG editor that lets them bold and change colors and change font sizes and things like that. And you want to render that value on the front end how they had it saved in their rich text editor. So if you use TH-text, Thymeleaf is actually going to escape everything for you. It's not going to let these bold tags go. And so what it'll render, it'll replace it with the ampersand LT, and then of course the user will see the less than, B greater than, but it won't actually be bolded. Instead, if you use the uText attribute, that will allow you to render unescaped text, and it will just put in exactly what you had as the value. So that's how you can achieve that. Sometimes, though, you don't really want to have to use this TH-text for a whole bunch of different things. Say you're trying to display an address. That might get annoying having to use a whole bunch of different spans just to display one value every time. And so there's this other attribute called th-inline, and you can inline text, you can also inline JavaScript. But what this is letting you do now is, instead of looking at the actual value of an attribute on the span, Thymeleaf is now going to process the contents of this span and treat that specially. And so if we're using the two square brackets, and we can then surround any type of Spring expression language expression that we want, we can kind of display our addresses without having to have a whole bunch of markup around it. If you're wondering what the question mark before the dot does on address.user.firstname and last name is it gives you null safe property traversal. So if your address didn't have a user, that expression won't blow up. It will figure out that user was null, and then at that point it won't attempt to call get first name on the user object. It'll just say user was null, so the result of this whole thing is null. And you can kind of do that instead of having to have a bunch of different lines saying if the user's null, then render isn't null, then render the first name and last name, otherwise don't. But this is still not great. We're repeating ourselves quite a bit here with this address dot all over the place. And so Thymeleaf provides this th object tag. And what th object does is whenever you put it on a DOM element, everything that's inside of that DOM element will now have access to this special different syntax that starts with a star. And so what the star does is it will execute the remainder of the expression on whatever the object that you have is. So these two slides are identical. They're both executing, address.user.firstname, address.line1, etc. But we don't have to repeat ourselves so much. And so it lets our templates be pretty nice, very easy to just digest as a person instead of using a whole bunch of couts like you would with JSPs. Pretty easy to see what's going on. Okay, so we've talked about text and object and some other things. A lot of times you'll want to affect the actual attributes on the DOM elements themselves, like class, for example. So let's take a look at everything that's going on here. There's a little bit. So we're expecting that the controller provided some objects in the model, is even and is error and row. Those are three things that we'll just assume that some controller set. And so what we're doing here is we're defining the class of this span based on that is even attribute. So if that's true, then we'll mark it as even. Otherwise, we'll mark it as odd. Class append is kind of nice because we don't have to have some complicated expression saying, if it's even and there's an error, then I want to do even error. Else, if it's even and there is no error, then I just want even. It lets you kind of just break it out and just say, if there is an error, then append this error class to the class. And this you can do. There's a lot of different attributes that have the subsequent append thing. So like ID and ID append, if you want to kind of dynamically generate some IDs on elements and other things like that as well. TH-ATTR is kind of the super powerful one. It lets you specify whatever you want. So any attribute that you want to put on your element, you can do it with TH-ATTR. And so here what we're doing is we're putting a data row ID, which we could then grab off that element. That's an HTML5 tag. And then if you wanted to specify multiple, just after the closing curly brace on row.id, you could put a comma and then specify more attributes as you'd like. Okay, so no templating engine is complete without conditionals. So there, the Thymeleaf idiom is to use th-if and th-unless with the same expression inside the two of them. And so here we can see that we've got this user object in our model. And if the user is logged in, then we're going to render some text, and we're going to say hi, and then the username. Additionally, or if we don't, we can have just a welcome guest default string printed out. So how about if we wanted to internationalize that? Well, we can do that too. So here in our messages.properties file, we've got our two greetings. And the first one is special in that it has this bracket 0, which means that this is a message that expects parameters. And so now in the bottom th-if, we can see that we're trying to get the value of that header message. And what we're going to pass to it with the parentheses is the username. And so this is handy for languages that might have the phrasing of the sentence. Your variable doesn't necessarily go at the end. It might make more sense in a different language that the variable goes at the beginning. And so when you're passing things like this to messages, you don't have to worry about trying to concatenate things in the right order for different languages. You just let the messages.property files use those variables in wherever they want. Because you could certainly do, dollar or curly brace 0, comma, hi. And you can pass in as many parameters as you want to these messages. Right. So let's take a look at loops and linking. So Thymeleaf can be used not just in a servlet context. You can use it to generate emails, any type of XML type of templating that you want to get, you can do with Thymeleaf, but I think that most people definitely do use it in a web context. And so we'll talk about the links and looping as well. So here we've got in our model, keyed by the word products, we've got just some list of products. Then in our Thymeleaf template, the new thing here is this th-each tag, which will repeat each of these li elements for each of the products that are in your model. So a lot of times you'll be looping, and so back to the natural language aspect of Thymeleaf, if you were a designer, you wouldn't want to just have this one li element to see a product. Say your product page has, supposed to look good with 9 products. You could duplicate those li elements in your template, and then there's an additional tag that you could put in on the top element that's th remove, and you can say all but first. And so what that'll do is it'll remove all the other LIs, and then it'll take the LI that has the Thymeleaf markup, and it'll loop that for your products so that you get dynamic stuff. But that still lets your designers have a bunch of products on their page in the template so that it looks right when they're previewing it outside of the servlet application context as well. That's just a side note. And so what we're doing here is we're looping through this LI, which gives us a product attribute, and we're going ahead and marking that product as the object that we want to use in here for convenience, because in the next 2 lines we're going to use the star syntax. And so what we're doing here, we've got our image, and we're specifying that the source of this image is going to be a main image property on the product. And the new thing here is this @ sign. And so what this @ sign does is it will render the link relative to your servlet context. So if your application is deployed on somesite.com, it'll just render whatever main link is. But if it was somesite.com/admin, your main link would get prepended with /admin automatically. So you don't have to code that every time. You can just let Thymeleaf figure out the relative nature of that link for your servlet. And so the rest of the attributes are pretty simple. We're seeing th source and th href. Pretty much any legal HTML DOM element attribute has a corresponding th1 that will do exactly what you would expect, but also process it through Thymeleaf. Okay. So we probably don't want to have real big templates everywhere. We want to mostly focus and have separation of concerns for our templates so that they're easier to digest. And we can certainly do that. If we take a look at the previous example here, we've extracted that image and the link tag out into this product block.html file. And what we're doing here in our looping is we're saying that for each of these li elements that we're generating for a product, we're just going to go ahead and include the contents of that file. So that just lets you have cleaner templates. In this example, it doesn't make too much sense because they're very simple, just a few lines here. But when you start getting into more complex templates that have hundreds of lines, this helps out quite a bit. Okay. So one additional thing that Thymeleaf provides is variable expressions. So we've got our controller again that puts our products on the model. And what we're seeing now here is we've got this one string expression that uses the $ syntax. And we're concatenating the string products found. And now the variable expression is this pound lists object. And we'll cover a few of them in the next few slides here. But they're basically just utility methods that you can use and call functions that return things to you that then just resolve as part of the normal expression language. So here, the products found would have a number that corresponds to the size of that list. So there's the dates variable expression, which lets you format things. So your server, your controller method puts some date object in your model, and you want to render it in a specific way on the template. You can let the Thymeleaf variable expression do that. You can extract out components of the date if you want to display just an individual piece. You can create dates. You can create now conveniently. The numbers variable expression gives you the ability to format an integer. If you want, a minimum number of digits to have things line up nicely on the template, you can do that. You can generate dynamic sequences, which you can then use to loop through. The strings variable expression gives you pretty much all of what you would expect from a strings utility class. It also gives you the ability to capitalize and capitalize words. Those are the neat ones which will either take a sentence and put it in normal sentence case where the first letter is capitalized, or you can capitalize words, which would be title case, and every letter would be capitalized. There's several different escape and escape methods. Those are just a couple of the examples. We've got arrays, lists, sets, and maps. They all have pretty much the same thing, to where you can check to see if things are empty, which is very handy with conditional operations. You might want to say, if my product result list is empty, then show this message saying no products found. Otherwise, loop through my products and render them. You can do sorting and contains. Aggregates is pretty neat. So Spring or Thymeleaf not only supports the Spring expression language, but also the Open Graph notation language. And this lets you do some pretty powerful stuff. So we've got our class order here, which has a list of order lines. And in each order line has a price and a quantity. And so aggregates is going to sum the price times the quantity for each of the order lines. So we're navigating through our properties. We've got our order, dot lines, dot, and then when it sees that curly brace, now it knows that that operation is supposed to happen for the current line that it's on. So it'll multiply the price and the quantity. And then sum is intelligent enough to say, okay, we have lines, and so that means that we want to loop through all of the lines in this order and sum them up. And so it's a pretty easy way to get, a total price for an order with one line there. Okay, so those are pretty much the core concepts of Thymeleaf. There's a lot of tags that I didn't mention, obviously, but we've talked on that and these variable expressions. The Thymeleaf documentation is really, really good. If you want to know, anything that's available in Thymeleaf, it's all very well documented, very easy to find, and you can see that on their website. So let's move on into some more advanced concepts. So we've got the ability to provide custom variable expressions. So like we saw with lists and strings and all of those, we can provide our own. So in Broadleaf we have some framework provided that makes creating these really easy. But even just in normal Thymeleaf and Spring, you can inject your own custom variable expressions with not too much customization. But basically what we're doing here is we're creating a system property variable expression, and we're going to key it by SP, and we're going to provide a method called getAsBoolean. And we have some service that is going to take some string, and it'll give us the value of that string as a Boolean. And so here we can see in our thif, we're directly calling that method. So you can call any Java method that you'd like directly from Thymeleaf to say, hey, if we're going to do pagination on this page, then let's give them the little list of, page numbers and with arrows and all those things. If you're using Thymeleaf with Spring, you also get direct bean access. So if you've got a bean called myService, and it's got some method, you can invoke that method within your expression. You can use the @ sign and then your bean name, and you can call methods directly there. So we can do custom processors, and we've seen processors all over the place. All of those thadder, thdata, all those things, those tags that we see are processors. And we can create our own, of course, and this is equivalent to taglibs and JSPs. So here we've got our processor, and it's going to be, the name of this processor will be price. And what we're doing is basically we'll take whatever is passed in to this price, and if the object there that was passed in was a money object, we'll format the value. Otherwise, we'll just let it continue and do a normal toString. So once we have our processor, which is equivalent to, say, the each part of a each, we need the dialect, and that's the th part. So we can create our custom dialect, and we're saying that this one's going to be named MCD. And then the rest here is just We're defining our dialect in the application context. We're putting our processor in there. And then we're in our template engine, which is that Spring template engine. We're just registering our dialect. And now what that lets us do in our product block, we can call mcd:price and give it a price object, and now that's going to go through our code there. So there's reasons where you might want to provide processors that do this versus variable expressions. They're pretty similar. You can do about the same thing either way. So let's take a look at a processor that's a little bit nicer. So what we're doing here is, let's say we wanted to secure all of our forms from cross-site request forgery. So we've got our form processor here, and we'll register it in our dialect with the name form. And what we're doing here is we're saying if the form is not a get, so if it's a post or a delete or a put, we're going to generate this new HTML DOM element, and we're going to insert it into our form. And so let's look at what happens. Now all we have to do is, instead of use normal form tags in our HTML, we do mcd:form, and whenever that actually renders, it'll invoke that processor, and it'll generate this new DOM element here with some randomly generated value, which we can then validate on the server to make sure that the user made a legitimate post. So on the subject of forms, we have normal Spring form binding, just like you'd get in JSPs. We've got our form backing object here for our user registration form. And what we're doing here is we've got a get method and a post method on this register. And the special thing here is that model attribute annotation. This is a Spring annotation. And now what we do here is we can put that th object directly on our form, and then we can use th field. So using th field is nice here because it'll do the binding. If there were errors on the form when you submit and it validates and it fails, it'll automatically output the error next to the field and do all sorts of automated stuff for you for submitting forms back and forth to the system. Alright, so let's talk about some things that you can use that help you use Thymeleaf. There is an Eclipse IDE plugin. It gives you code completion for the attributes. It helps you out with the expression languages with Content Assist. If you're defining your own dialects with your own processors, you're able to define some schema that provides that help text, and you can register that with the plugin as well, so that even your custom stuff you can get code completion and Content Assist with. If you're currently using Apache tiles, Thymeleaf works with tiles as well, and you can actually even mix JSP and Thymeleaf templates. So if you're in the process of migrating an application, you don't have to do it all at once. You can kind of mix and match and use the two together. There's also Spring MVC 3 and Spring Webflow 2.3 integrations, which just kind of help you in the same way that you get those with tiles and JSPs. It works with Thymeleaf as well. There's a different layout dialect. This one's unofficial, but it is written by one of the two core contributors to Thymeleaf. And this is a bit of a more lightweight approach instead of tiles. Instead of having some XML files outside of your templates that you define, this template's supposed to use this parent layout, you can kind of do that all within the templates themselves, and you can say, here's a part that is for a body in your layout, and then when you're in your component, you can say, this uses this uses this layout. You can even inject into two different parts of the layout. It's really nice. I like this more than tiles myself. It's pretty good. There's Spring Security 3 integrations. Basically, it's just an additional processor they provide that lets you send it normal Spring Security expressions. You can test to see, if the current user is logged in. You can get the authentication object with a variable expression and get the kind of the name, email, those kinds of things. There's a cache dialect, which is pretty nice. So Thymeleaf has a built-in cache for once it parses your template, it'll save off kind of just the XML structure of this template. But if you want to get a little bit fancier with your caching, you can cache, rendered HTML out of it. And what's nice about that is, if your products aren't changing very much, you don't want to have necessarily to go through all these elements and kind of render your product image and your links and price and all those kinds of things. You can just cache that HTML, and that helps speed up Thymeleaf quite a bit. Performance was something I didn't touch on. It's obviously not going to be as fast as JSP, since JSP is a compiled language, but it's very fast, especially with caching turned on. You can serve thousands of requests per second on just normal hardware. Thymol was what I mentioned, that provides the ability for doing includes and those kinds of things, but still not have to have a server fronting the page, which helps designers out. And they also have some features that help you test both the if and the else case when you're using those, even without a server behind it. Okay. So let's talk about just a few things that we've done at Broadleaf that kind of leverage these Thymeleaf concepts that provide some nice features. So we've got the ability to provide JavaScript and CSS bundling. So in development, you want all your files how they are so that you can debug and do all sorts of things. But you might want to bundle those as one JavaScript file whenever you're running in production for performance reasons. So you can create a processor, as we have, this bundle processor, which will bundle those three BLC files together into admin.js. This is similar to jar, if you've heard of that, which they do a similar thing, and there is a Thymeleaf jar extension, but we needed a little bit more control since we allow editing these JavaScript and CSS files from the admin. We wanted to be able to automatically expire bundles whenever they get saved so that users see the changes immediately. We also did a bit of a more advanced caching strategy. So we take into account, if you're on this product page, we take a look at the products that were going to be rendered on that page, and our cache key is generated with that. And so then we're just a little bit more intelligent about those cache key generations. So you can certainly write your own, thing like that if the provided extensions aren't sophisticated enough for you. We also provided a mechanism that lets you have a little bit of dynamic piece even if the majority of the page is cached. We have some ability to kind of inject some stuff in there, which was something that the cache dialect didn't provide out of box. And lastly, I've mentioned this before as well, where we're serving these templates directly from the admin. And by doing this, there's the ability to have the admin application. You can change a template, and you can see it directly live on the site.